Okay, I'm ready. And if you see my screen, I shall move on. So thank you again for inviting me. Today, I would like to talk about us scientists. And I think it is fair to say that scientists are seen as experts most of the time by a sizable portion of the population. So, for instance, when the media come to you, the scientists, to ask you about your discipline, about your work, they come to you because you are experts. They categorize you as experts. For instance, this is the website by the RTS, the Swiss radio and TV, and they have a list of experts, and experts are the academics that and scientists that have been interviewed. So why is this important? Why it's important to focus on expertise? It is important because when you go on the website of Scientists Rebellion, you can see that this is a very important feature that is put forward. So it is said that academics have knowledge, and expertise, and authority, and legitimacy, and therefore, and this is important, possibly political power. And thus, we can make a difference. Well, hold your horses. It's probably not so simple. Let me tell you why. When you study communication and persuasion, it has been known for a very long time that the characteristics of the source of influence, that is expertise, for instance, is not the whole story. You have to study who says what in which channel to whom and with what effect. And this is very old stuff. This is not Spitzenforschung. This is 1948. And this is why I'm saying that the picture might be a little bit more complicated than what we think. It's not just because scientists are experts that they have influence. So one should consider other characteristics of the source of influence, so expertise, but also trust and similarity, and the context within which influence takes place, or norms, values, interest, and the channel is important, and the message is important, its content, not only its content, but also its structure, and the target is important. So the person who receives the communication, so his or her own competence, motivation, commitment, and of course the effect. So this is, as you can see, is very complicated. Of course, I won't go through all this today. I would like to focus on three elements for today: source, context, and target. Let's start with good news. So the good news is that a source of influence is more persuasive if it is perceived as competent, intelligent, high status, high level of education. So there's a lot of work, or a lot of studies, experimental work that shows that when a source is perceived with these characteristics, then that source will yield more influence, more change. And this is good news for the scientists, because this is generally these are generally the characteristics of scientists. So, for example, wouldn't you believe these two people, this man and this woman? Of course you would. They look smart, competent, of course, they have a high level of education. And if I tell you, but you know it already, that they are Nobel Prize laureates, then of course, their influence is even greater. So these are the good news. However, expertise is not enough. As I told you, expertise is just one element within this whole model. And of course, I made it simple. Believe me, it's even more complicated than that. So it's time to delve into the specifics of problems that scientists might encounter. So problem number one is that experts are not alone. It might seem trivial, but it's very important. Sometimes we have the impression that we have this knowledge and we communicate it and that it works. Well, we're not alone out there. So this is the theory of social impact. Again, old stuff. That was developed by Butera many years ago. And he argued that social impact, that is the extent to which a source of influence has the ability to produce change, is a function of three elements: strength, for instance, the size of this ball; immediacy, so the closer a source to the target, the greater the influence; and number. So you might think, okay, but this is very good news for scientists, because strength is a conglomerate of many characteristics, among which expertise. So the greater the expertise, the greater the impact. Sure, but this is one of three elements. Number is important, and there are other sources of influence out there that might not push in the same direction. So let me give you an example. This is a study that was published a few years ago that shows that climate change scientists and climate change contrarians are represented in the media to a similar extent, if not higher in certain media. So that means that you might have great expertise, but there are other sources of influence that are represented in the social space, sometimes in greater numbers, sometimes due to the work of social media with greater immediacy. So that means that it's not because scientists are experts that they will have more influence than other sources. So that was the first problem. The second problem is that experts may be threatening. It might seem very odd, and it is indeed. But this is something that is very close to my heart, because we've worked a lot on this issue, and I would like to be specific with this matter. So, a few years ago, we have developed this model that tried to identify the important variables that determine social influence when knowledge is at stake. So social influence about knowledge, about, for instance, about learning. And so we ended up looking through the literature. We ended up with three variables that are important: the competence of the source, whether higher or lower; the competence of the target of influence, again either high or low; And this is what I want to talk about today. And whether the social comparison between target and source is threatening or not threatening. This is very important because if we focus on these two cases, let's forget about the rest. These are the two cases we're concerned with today, because when we are dealing with experts, with scientists, well, scientists are generally in an upward position as compared with their targets. So we are in the case where a high competent source is communicating with a low competence target. Lower, higher, lower, everything is relative. And we can have two possibilities. One is when the source is perceived as threatening, and this is what we call informational constraint. So, of course, the target will comply with the source. Imitation will take place. So, wow, yes, of course. But because yielding, compliance is a matter of adopting a position without really processing the information. So disengagement will ensue. But when the high competence source is not threatening, one might focus on the information, not on the status. Then informational dependence takes place. Again, imitation, but in this case, imitation is not mere imitation, is a form of learning, a long-term change. So you might ask why a high competence source should be threatening. Well, the origins of threat may be numerous. One is coercion. The source imposes its own point of view. Mere status. One complies just because it's an expert, scientist, professor. Might be autonomy reduction. Well, if you have to follow a source, then you're less autonomous. So you're not thinking with your own mind. And this might in turn deplete self-esteem, which is very threatening. And of course, competition. Competition, if in a position of competition, competition is a matter of right or wrong. So if the expert is right and he or she is competent, I am wrong and therefore incompetent. And this is, again, very threatening. Why is this important? Because the scientists, experts would like to have long-term influence, not mere compliance, long-term influence. And informational constraint and informational dependence are very different with this respect. So, as I said before, informational constraint has immediate influence because compliance is saying, yes, you're right, but then no long-term influence. If scientists want to have a long-term influence, then they should not be threatening and elicit informational dependence, because informational dependence will end up in immediate influence and also long-term influence. So I think this is quite important. Let's go back to the good news. There are solutions to these two problems, especially the problem of experts being potentially threatening. The first solution is cooperation. Cooperation is a matter of working together, and therefore focusing on what is at stake, on the information, not on status differences, on information. And so, for instance, if you take again a picture of Jacques Dubochet, I hope he doesn't mind, um, but he's our prototype of the scientist. Uh, so it might be that the same expert is more influential in this situation than in this situation. That is when he's among the people he's working with, and not and no up high on the stand. And so this is just an example, but the message here is really scientists should share their knowledge, not impose their status. And sometimes it's not what we see. It's kind of difficult. If you have high status, well, it comes with you. Um, oh, sorry. Um, and it works. Cooperation works. So this is a study we've done a few years ago with my colleagues, Céline Buche and Gabriel Meunier. We had groups working together to learn some materials, cooperating groups. And we had a measure of perceived partners' competence. So we knew to what extent they thought their partner was competent. And we had a measure of delayed performance. So real learning, to what extent they learned something that stayed on. And we had two experimental conditions. One, they interacted in both conditions, but forget about these labels because I would have to explain too much. So one was mere interaction, and the other one was genuine cooperation. So if you look at the dotted line, what you see is that the higher the perceived partner's competence, the greater the learning. So you might say, but this is obvious. If you work with somebody who knows more, well, you learn more. Right, I agree. But the problem is that this happens only when genuine cooperation takes place. Cooperation that is respectful, that allows people taking turns, that respects the dignity of all the partners. But when mere interaction takes place, if anything, the relationship is the opposite. Solution number 2, modeling. So here you can see our rector, who is, of course, high status, but also an expert scientist. And you can see that not only is she wearing a mask, but she's also riding a bike. So scientists have things to say. Of course, they develop knowledge and they share their knowledge, but they are also people. They are also citizens. They do things. And what they do has an impact on the extent to which targets believe them. And again, it works. So this is a meta-analysis done by Abramson and Stagg. And in this meta-analysis, where they studied the social influence approaches that encourage resource conservation, modeling is one of those approaches that is highly influential. So it works. Solution number 3, trust. Trust is very important. Let me give you an example of the opposite of trust, mistrust. So very, very often it happens that scientists are not as trustworthy as we would like them to be. So this is a very famous case of a social psychologist who manipulated his data and his research for more than 20 years. In the end, he got caught, and it was a big scandal. And this kind of scandals are very harmful to science because we need trust. We need to be trusted. We need we scientists um, because we are entrusted by the population who and the taxpayers pays who pay our salary. So as for modeling, we have to be trustworthy, and if we do, then again it works. This is a study, very recent study, came out this year, that we did with colleagues in 23 countries. We wanted to predict the adherence to prescribed behavior related to COVID-19, so hand washing, distancing, mask wearing, and so on and so forth. And what we saw was that trust in science is a very important predictor. It predicts the prescribed behaviors, but it also predicts discretionary behaviors. So what people do on top of complying with the prescriptions, like helping neighbors, donating to charities, and so on and so forth. So let me wrap up. It's time to move to the discussion. So it is very important that we understand that it is not because scientists are experts that they have influence. They might have immediate influence. People might comply. People might say yes. People might think that they are wrong, that they are right. But then if they do so, just because scientists are experts, then they don't process the information. And if they don't process the information, they don't learn anything. However, if scientists manage to create a cooperative setting, to become models, to um, to be trustworthy, then it is possible that they elicit informational dependence and that they have immediate and long-term influence. And of course, there is more, but there is only so much one can say during one talk. So I will thank you for your attention, and I will welcome any question. Thank you very much.